The last thing Jacob Brennan expected when he rode his paint stallion through the pines toward his isolated cabin in the Montana Territory was to smell fresh bread baking and coffee brewing on the wind. It was late September in 1878, and Jacob had spent the last 6 weeks in the high country trapping beaver and marten, preparing for winter. His shoulders ached from hauling pelts down the mountain, and his stomach had been growling for something besides jerky and hardtack for days. The cabin he had built with his own hands 3 years ago sat in a clearing near a creek, miles from the nearest settlement, and he had left it locked and empty when he departed. No one should be there. No one had any reason to be there. Jacob dismounted quietly, his tall frame moving with practiced silence despite his size. At 6'4" and built like an oak tree, with broad shoulders thick with muscle from years of splitting wood and hauling traps through deep snow, he was not a man easily surprised. His dark hair hung past his collar, tied back with a leather cord, and his gray eyes narrowed as he studied his cabin. Smoke curled from the chimney. The door stood slightly ajar, and through the window he could see movement inside. His hand went to the knife at his belt. Outlaws sometimes used abandoned cabins as hideouts and claimed jumpers had been known to squat on a trapper's land while he was away. Jacob approached the cabin from the side, keeping low, his boots silent on the pine needles. He pressed himself against the log wall and peered through the window. What he saw stopped him cold. A woman stood at his stove, her back to him, humming softly as she stirred something in his largest pot. She wore a simple calico dress in deep blue, the fabric worn but clean, and her auburn hair was pinned up in a practical bun with loose curls escaping around her face. She was young, maybe mid-20s, with a slender build and graceful movements as she worked. She reached for the Dutch oven on the back of the stove, checking whatever was inside, and the smell of roasting meat joined the scent of fresh bread. Jacob stood there for a long moment, completely baffled. This was not what he had expected. The woman did not move like someone robbing his cabin. She moved like someone who belonged there, comfortable and unhurried. She had cleaned the place, too. He could see that even through the window. The floor had been swept, his few dishes were stacked neatly on the shelf, and his table was set for two. He walked to the door and pushed it fully open. The woman spun around with a gasp, her hand flying to her chest. She held a wooden spoon, and her eyes went wide as she took in the sight of him filling the doorway. "Oh," she breathed. "Oh, you are real." Jacob stepped inside, ducking slightly out of habit though his doorframe was tall enough. "I am very real, and this is my cabin. Who are you, and what are you doing here?" The woman lowered the spoon slowly, and he saw her taking in his appearance, from his buckskin jacket stained with travel to the knife at his belt and the rifle slung across his back. To her credit, she did not look afraid. Surprised, yes, but not frightened. "My name is Sarah Brennan," she said quietly, "and I am your wife." Jacob felt the world tilt slightly. "My what?" "Your wife." Sarah turned back to the stove, stirring the pot again as if this were a normal conversation. "Your brother James sent me. We were married by proxy 3 weeks ago in St. Louis. He said you needed a wife and I needed a new start, and he arranged everything." "James." Jacob closed his eyes and counted to 10. His younger brother, the charming bastard who could talk anyone into anything, had been after him for 2 years to find a wife. Jacob had ignored every letter on the subject. "James is in Denver. I have not seen him in over a year." "He was in St. Louis this summer on business," Sarah said. She ladled stew into 2 bowls and carried them to the table. "He stayed at the boarding house where I worked. We got to talking and he told me about you, about how you live up here alone and how you are a good man who needs someone, and how this territory is full of opportunity for people willing to work hard." She set the bowls down and looked at him directly. "I had nothing left in St. Louis. No family, no prospects, and the boarding house was closing. James offered me a chance at a real life. So I took it." Jacob stood there, still trying to process this. "You married a man you have never met." "Women do it all the time out here," Sarah said. She pulled the bread from the oven, golden and perfect. "Mail-order brides, proxy marriages, arranged matches. I am not the first, and I will not be the last." She sliced the bread with his knife, her hands steady. "James showed me your photograph. He told me you were honorable and hard-working. He said you would be a good husband if you would just stop being so stubborn about finding a wife. That sounds like James, Jacob muttered. He should be angrier, but the smell of the food was making his stomach cramp with hunger, and the woman, Sarah, his apparent wife, did not seem crazy or malicious, just determined. "Sit down and eat," Sarah said. "You look half-starved. When is the last time you had a hot meal?" 6 weeks ago. Jacob moved to the table slowly. The stew was venison, rich and thick with vegetables. The bread was perfect, crusty on the outside and soft inside. Coffee steamed in his mug. He sat down heavily in his chair and looked up at her. "Where did you get all this food?" "I brought supplies with me from town. James gave me money for the journey and for setting up the household." Sarah sat across from him. "The venison I traded for with your neighbor, Mr. Henderson. He lives about 5 miles east. He's been very kind, checking on me while I waited for you to return." Jacob felt his jaw tighten. "Henderson came by?" 3 times, Sarah said. She picked up her spoon. "He seemed surprised to find me here. I explained the situation, and he helped me chop firewood the first day since the pile was low. Henderson was a widower in his 50s, a decent enough man but lonely, and always looking for a new wife." Jacob made a mental note to have a conversation with him soon. "You've been here alone for how long?" 2 weeks. Sarah tasted the stew and nodded in satisfaction. "James told me you would be back before the first snow. I got here mid-September and waited. I cleaned the cabin, organized your supplies, and tried to make myself useful." Jacob ate in silence for a moment. The stew was the best thing he had tasted in months. The woman could cook, that was certain. He studied her across the table. She was pretty in a quiet way, with clear green eyes and a dusting of freckles across her nose. Her hands were work-worn, not the soft hands of a lady, and there was a sadness in her eyes that she was trying to hide. "Tell me about yourself," he said finally. "The truth." Sarah met his gaze. "What do you want to know?" "Everything." She was quiet for a moment, organizing her thoughts. "I'm 24 years old. I was born in Pennsylvania. My father was a blacksmith, and my mother died when I was 12. I have one brother who went west during the war and never came back. My father passed 2 years ago from pneumonia. I was engaged to be married, but my fiancée died in a factory accident 6 months before the wedding." She paused, taking a sip of coffee. "After that, I worked at the boarding house to support myself. The owner was a kind woman, but she fell ill last spring and her children decided to sell the property. I had 2 months to find new employment or a new situation. James arrived in July, and by August, we had arranged everything." "You agreed to marry a stranger and move to the Montana Territory with nothing but James's word that I was a good man," Jacob said. "I had nothing to lose," Sarah replied, "and James was very convincing. He showed me letters you had written, talking about this land and your cabin. He told me you were honest and strong, and that you would treat me well. That was more than I had in St. Louis." Jacob pushed his empty bowl away. He should send her back. This was insane. James had no right to arrange a marriage without his knowledge or consent. But as he looked around his cabin, clean and warm and smelling of good food, and then back at Sarah, sitting straight and proud despite the uncertainty in her eyes, he found he could not quite work up the anger he should feel. "I am not an easy man to live with," he said slowly. "I am used to being alone. I do not talk much, and I spend weeks at a time in the mountains. Winters here are brutal. The nearest town is a day's ride. This is a hard life." "I know hard lives," Sarah said. "I've been working since I was 12 years old. I can cook, clean, sew, tend a garden, and preserve food. I can shoot a rifle, though I am not an expert. I'm not afraid of work, and I'm not afraid of solitude." She folded her hands on the table. "I am not asking for luxury or ease. I am asking for a chance at a real home and a partnership with a good man. If you will give me that chance, I will do everything I can to be a good wife to you." Jacob stood and walked to the window, looking out at the mountains turning gold in the setting sun. His life had been simple before this. Lonely, maybe, but simple. He trapped in the fall and winter, sold his pelts in the spring, and spent the summers laying in supplies and maintaining his property. He had friends in town, acquaintances like Henderson, but no one close, no one to come home to. He turned back to Sarah. "This is going to take some getting used to." A small smile touched her lips. "For both of us." I'm not sending you back tonight, Jacob said. It is too late and you have nowhere to go. But we need to set some ground rules until we figure this out. All right? You can sleep in the bed. I will take the floor tonight. He held up a hand when she started to protest. I am used to sleeping rough. One more night will not hurt me. Tomorrow we will talk about this properly and decide what to do. Sarah nodded. That's fair. They cleaned up the dinner together in awkward silence. Sarah washed while Jacob dried, and he was acutely aware of how small the cabin felt with another person in it. She had put her things in the corner by the bed, a trunk and a carpet bag, both worn but sturdy. He wondered what possessions she had chosen to bring to this new life. As darkness fell, Jacob went out to tend to his horse and bring in his gear. The pelts he stored in the small shed he had built for that purpose, carefully hanging them to air. When he came back inside, Sarah had changed into a nightgown and wrapper and was brushing out her hair by the fire. It fell past her shoulders in waves, catching the firelight. Your hair's longer than I expected, Jacob said, then felt foolish for saying it. Sarah smiled slightly. Most women keep their hair long. We just pin it up during the day. I know that, Jacob said, feeling his ears heat. He was not normally awkward around women, but this situation was unlike anything he had experienced. He made up a bedroll by the fire while Sarah climbed into the bed. The cabin fell quiet except for the crackling of the flames and the wind in the pines outside. Jacob lay on his back, staring at the ceiling, intensely aware of the woman sleeping 10 feet away. Jacob? Sarah's voice came soft from the darkness. Yes? Thank you for not sending me away immediately. I know this is not what you wanted. It is not your fault, Jacob said. James means well, but he should have asked me first. Would you have said yes if he had? Jacob considered that. Probably not. Then maybe he did the right thing after all, Sarah said quietly. Jacob did not answer, and eventually he heard her breathing even out into sleep. He lay awake for a long time, listening to the unfamiliar sound of someone else in his home, and wondering what the hell he was going to do. Morning came cold and bright. Jacob woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon, and for a moment forgot where he was. Then he remembered, and sat up to find Sarah already dressed and cooking breakfast. She had her hair pinned up again, and looked fresh despite the early hour. Good morning, she said. I hope I did not wake you. I'm usually up before dawn, Jacob said. He stood and stretched, feeling his back pop. The floor had been harder than he remembered, or maybe he was getting old at 32. They ate breakfast together, and then Jacob went outside to chop wood while Sarah cleaned up. He needed to think, and physical work always helped him clear his head. The rhythmic swing of the axe and the solid thunk of splitting wood centered him. Henderson showed up around mid-morning, riding a buckskin mare and carrying a brace of rabbits. He was a tall, thin man with graying hair and a weathered face. Brennan, he said, dismounting, did not expect you back so soon. It is late September, Henderson. I am right on time. Jacob sunk the axe into the chopping block. I hear you have been checking on my wife. Henderson had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. She said you were married. I figured she was telling stories at first, but she had the papers to prove it. Seemed like she needed help, so I offered. I appreciate that, Jacob said, meaning it, but she's got help now. Fair enough. Henderson handed over the rabbits. These are for her anyway. She mentioned wanting to make a stew. She's a fine cook, your wife. So I have learned, Jacob said. Henderson rode off, and Jacob brought the rabbits inside. Sarah was mending one of his shirts, her needle flashing in the light from the window. Henderson brought these, Jacob said, setting the rabbits on the counter. That is kind of him, Sarah set aside her sewing. He is a lonely man. He is a man looking for a wife, Jacob said bluntly. You should keep that in mind. Sarah's eyebrows rose. Are you jealous? I am practical. You are a woman alone in the wilderness as far as most people know. Men will take that as an invitation. I am not a woman alone, Sarah said. I am a married woman, and now that you are back, everyone will know it. Jacob ran a hand through his hair. About that. We need to talk. They sat at the table with fresh coffee, and Jacob tried to organize his thoughts. This situation is not normal, he began. I am aware, Sarah said dryly. I am trying to be fair to you, Jacob continued. You came all this way in good faith. James told you I was your husband, and legally I suppose I am, though I never agreed to it. But we do not know each other. We are strangers who happen to be married." "That is true," Sarah agreed. "So I'm proposing this," Jacob said. "We give it the winter. You stay here. We live as housemates, I suppose. We get to know each other. Come spring, if this is not working, I will give you money to go wherever you want and start over. No hard feelings, no obligation." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "And if it does work?" "Then we make it a real marriage," Jacob said. "What does that mean to you? A real marriage?" Jacob felt heat creep up his neck. "You know what I mean." "I want to hear you say it," Sarah said. "We should be clear about expectations." "Fine," Jacob said. "A real marriage means we are partners. We share our lives, our home, our bed. We work together to build something here. We are husband and wife in every sense." "And until then?" Sarah asked. "Until then, we live like housemates. You have the bed, I will take the floor or build a second sleeping area. We share the work and the meals, but nothing else. We figure out if we can stand each other." Sarah considered this. "That is fair, but I have one condition." "What is it?" "You have to really give this a chance," Sarah said. "Do not just go through the motions waiting for spring. Actually try to get to know me and let me get to know you. We make an honest effort." Jacob extended his hand across the table. "Deal." Sarah shook it, her hand small and warm in his. Deal. The days fell into a pattern. Jacob spent the mornings working on the property, reinforcing the shed and cabin against winter, checking his trap lines, and hunting. Sarah kept the cabin, cooked, and started putting up food for winter. She had brought seeds with her and was disappointed that it was too late in the season to plant a garden, but Jacob promised they would start one in the spring. They talked more than Jacob had talked to anyone in years. Over breakfast, over dinner, during the long evenings by the fire, Sarah told him about growing up in Pennsylvania, about her father teaching her to read using his Bible and the town newspaper, about her mother, who had loved to sing and had taught Sarah every hymn and folk song she knew, about her fiancé, Thomas, who had been kind but quiet, and whose death had left her more alone than sad. "Does that make me a terrible person?" Sarah asked one evening as she knitted socks by the firelight, "that I did not love him enough to be devastated?" "It makes you honest," Jacob said. He was oiling his traps, preparing them for the winter season. "Love is not always what the poets make it out to be." "Have you ever been in love?" Sarah asked. Jacob paused. "Once, a long time ago." "What happened?" "She married someone else," Jacob said. "A banker in Denver, someone who could give her a nice house and a comfortable life." "Did you ask her to marry you?" "No," Jacob admitted. "I was 22 and had nothing but dreams of heading into the mountains. I could not offer her anything real." "Do you regret it?" Jacob thought about that. "I regret not trying. But I do not regret the life I chose. I like the mountains, the solitude. I like building something with my own hands." "You are a good builder," Sarah said, looking around the cabin. "This is solid work." "My father was a carpenter," Jacob said. "He taught me before he died. Said a man who could work with his hands would never starve." They talked about their families, their pasts, their hopes. Sarah wanted children someday, a garden, maybe some chickens. Jacob wanted to expand his trap lines, maybe build a bigger cabin, eventually buy some cattle. They found they both liked coffee strong and black, both hated raisins, and both had a weakness for peppermint candy. 3 weeks after Jacob's return, the first snow fell. It was early October, just a dusting, but it signaled the change of seasons. Jacob woke to find Sarah standing at the window in her wrapper, watching the flakes fall. "It is beautiful," she said softly. Jacob came to stand beside her. "This is nothing. Wait until January when the snow is 6 feet deep and you have not seen the sun in a week." "I am not afraid of snow," Sarah said. She glanced up at him, and he realized how close they were standing. He could smell the lavender soap she used, see the delicate freckles across her cheeks. Her eyes were the color of spring leaves. Jacob stepped back, his heart beating faster than it should. "I will bring in more firewood." He spent the morning outside in the cold, chopping wood with more force than necessary. This was getting complicated. He had expected to find Sarah tolerable at best, annoying at worst. Instead, he found himself looking forward to their conversations, noticing the way she hummed while she cooked, appreciating the care she put into everything she did. That afternoon, he went into town for supplies. Red Pine was a small settlement, barely big enough to warrant the name, with a general store, a saloon, a blacksmith, and a handful of houses. Jacob tied his horse outside the store and went in. Mrs. Chen, who ran the store with her husband, greeted him with a knowing smile. "Mr. Brennan, I heard you got yourself a wife." News traveled fast. "That's right. Henderson said she was a pretty thing. Mail order?" "Something like that," Jacob said, not wanting to explain the whole story. "Well, congratulations," Mrs. Chen said warmly. "What can I get for you?" Jacob ordered flour, sugar, coffee, and other staples. On impulse, he added a tin of peppermint candies and a length of green fabric that matched Sarah's eyes. "Making a good impression," Mrs. Chen observed as she wrapped the fabric. "Trying to," Jacob admitted. When he returned to the cabin, Sarah was scrubbing the floor. She sat back on her heels when he entered, pushing a stray curl out of her face. "You did not have to do that," Jacob said. "The floor was clean." "I needed something to do," Sarah said. "I am not used to sitting idle." Jacob set down his supplies. "I brought you something." Sarah dried her hands and came to the table. He handed her the fabric first. She unfolded it, her eyes widening. "Jacob, this is too much." "You need a new dress," he said gruffly. "That one is getting worn." "This is beautiful," Sarah said, running her fingers over the soft wool. "Thank you." He handed her the peppermints next. Sarah laughed, a real laugh that lit up her whole face. "You remembered." "I pay attention," Jacob said. That night, Sarah sat by the fire with the fabric in her lap, planning how she would cut it. Jacob watched her from his bedroll, noticing the soft smile on her face. "Sarah?" "Yes?" "I'm glad you are here," Jacob said. Sarah looked at him, surprised. Then her smile widened. "I am glad I'm here, too." Winter settled in hard and fast. By November, the snow was 3 feet deep and still falling. Jacob ran his trap lanes on snowshoes, checking them every few days, while Sarah kept the cabin warm and the food supplies rotating. They were snowed in more often than not, sometimes for days at a time. Being confined in close quarters could have been suffocating, but somehow it was not. They learned to move around each other in the small space, developed routines that worked. Jacob built a second sleeping platform against the far wall, giving them both more privacy and him a better rest than the floor had provided. Sarah finished her green dress and looked beautiful in it, though Jacob only told her it was nice. He did not trust himself to say more. She made him a new shirt from some fabric she had brought, and it fit perfectly. She baked bread twice a week, and the cabin always smelled like home. They played cards in the evenings, teaching each other different games. Sarah was competitive and did not like to lose, which made Jacob laugh. He taught her to shoot better, setting up targets outside on clear days. She had a steady hand and good aim once she learned to breathe through the recoil. "Why is this important?" Sarah asked one afternoon as she reloaded the rifle. "Because I am not always going to be here," Jacob said. "If something happens, if someone comes around who should not, you need to be able to protect yourself." Sarah studied him. "You're worried about me." "I am responsible for you," Jacob said. "That means making sure you can take care of yourself." "I thought we were housemates, not husband and wife," Sarah said, but she was smiling. "Housemates look out for each other too," Jacob said. Christmas came quietly. They did not have much, but Sarah made a special dinner with a venison roast and dried apple pie. Jacob had carved her a set of wooden buttons for her sewing kit, spending hours by the fire getting them smooth and perfect. Sarah gave him a knitted scarf in deep blue. "I made it from yarn I brought with me," she explained. "I thought you might need it for the cold." Jacob wrapped it around his neck. It was soft and warm, and he could smell the lavender soap on it. "It is perfect. Thank you." They sat by the fire that evening, listening to the wind howl outside. Sarah sang some of the Christmas hymns her mother had taught her, her voice clear and sweet. Jacob found himself relaxing in a way he had not in years, content in a way that had nothing to do with solitude and everything to do with the woman beside him. "This is a good Christmas," Sarah said softly. "Best one I have had in a long time," Jacob agreed. Sarah turned to look at him. "Jacob, I need to tell you something." His heart sped up. "What is it?" "I do not want to wait until spring," Sarah said. "I already know this is working. I am happy here. I'm happy with you." Jacob set down his coffee carefully. "Sarah, I'm not asking you to make any promises," Sarah continued. "I just want you to know that I'm not looking for a way out anymore. This is where I want to be." Jacob stood and walked to the window, looking out at the snow-covered landscape. His heart was pounding. He'd been thinking the same thing for weeks, but had not wanted to admit it. He had been so sure he needed to be alone that he was better off without attachments. But Sarah had changed everything without even trying. "I am not good at this," he said finally, talking about feelings. "You are doing fine," Sarah said gently. Jacob turned to face her. "I've been alone for a long time. I got used to it, convinced myself I liked it. But these last few months with you here, I've realized something." "What is that?" "I was lonely," Jacob said. "I just did not want to admit it. And now that you are here, I do not want to go back to being alone." Sarah stood, moving closer to him. "Then do not." "It is not that simple," Jacob said. "What if I am not what you need? What if you get tired of this life, of the isolation and the cold and the hard work?" "What if I do not?" Sarah countered. "What if this is exactly what I need? What if you are exactly what I need?" They stood there in the firelight, close enough to touch but not quite touching. Jacob could see the hope in Sarah's eyes, the vulnerability. "I care about you," he said roughly. "More than I expected to, more than I know what to do with." "I care about you too," Sarah said. "So what do we do about it?" Jacob reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. She did not. He cupped her face in his hands, his calloused palms against her soft skin. "Are you sure about this? About me?" "I have never been more sure of anything," Sarah whispered. Jacob kissed her, gentle at first, then deeper when she leaned into him. She tasted like apple pie and peppermint, and she fit perfectly against him. Her hands came up to his chest, gripping his shirt, and he wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Sarah smiled up at him. That was worth waiting for. Jacob laughed, something he seemed to do more often with her around. "We should probably talk about this." "We have been talking for months," Sarah said. "I think we are done talking." That night, Jacob took apart the second sleeping platform he had built. Sarah was his wife, had been from the beginning, and he was done pretending otherwise. They came together with a tenderness that surprised him, learning each other in the flickering firelight. Sarah was brave and open, meeting him without hesitation, and Jacob was careful with her, wanting her first time with him to be good. Afterwards, they lay tangled together in the bed that was now theirs, and Jacob felt something settle in his chest. This was right. This was home. "No regrets?" he murmured into her hair. "Not a single one," Sarah said. She traced patterns on his chest, her fingers light. "You are a good man, Jacob Brennan." "You're a good woman, Sarah Brennan," he replied. She smiled against his skin. "I like the sound of that." Winter continued, but the cabin felt warmer now, fuller. They fell into a new rhythm, this one as husband and wife in truth. Jacob found excuses to touch her, to pull her close, to kiss her. Sarah bloomed under the attention, her smiles coming easier, her laughter more frequent. They made plans during the long evenings. In the spring they would plant a large garden. Jacob would build a chicken coop, and they would get hens from Henderson. Maybe in a year or two they would add a room onto the cabin, start thinking about a family. "How many children do you want?" Sarah asked one night as they lay in bed. "I have not thought about it much," Jacob admitted. "Maybe 3 or 4. "That sounds good," Sarah said. "A nice full house." "This cabin is not big enough for that," Jacob said. "So we make it bigger," Sarah said simply. "We build what we need." In February, a blizzard hit that lasted 3 days. The snow piled so high against the door they had to dig their way out. Jacob worried about his trap lines, about the animals that might be suffering. But there was nothing he could do until the storm passed. They stayed inside, keeping the fire high, rationing their supplies just in case. Sarah taught Jacob some of the songs her mother had taught her, and he found he had a decent voice when he tried. They played cards and told stories, and made love while the wind screamed outside. On the 3rd day, the storm broke. Jacob dug them out and went to check his lines. Several traps had been buried or sprung by the weight of the snow, but most were intact. He found a large wolverine in one, a prize pelt that would bring good money in the spring. When he returned to the cabin, Sarah had hot stew and bread waiting. He cleaned up and sat down to eat, grateful for the warmth and the food and the woman who had made this cabin a home. "I was thinking," Sarah said as she poured coffee, "when the weather breaks, we should go to town and have a proper celebration, Let everyone know we are married." "They already know," Jacob said. "But we should celebrate it anyway," Sarah insisted. "Have a party, invite the neighbors, it would be nice." Jacob was not much for parties, but the happiness in Sarah's eyes made him agree. "All right. When spring comes, we will have a celebration." March arrived with the first hints of thaw. The days grew longer, the sun stronger. Jacob began preparing for the spring trapping season, while Sarah started planning her garden. They went to town together, riding double on Jacob's horse, and spread the word about a party at the Brennan cabin in late April. Mrs. Chen was delighted. "Finally, a proper wedding celebration. I will bring my famous dumplings." Henderson congratulated Jacob with a knowing grin. "Worked out after all, did it?" "Better than I expected," Jacob admitted. They bought supplies, including seeds for Sarah's garden and a dozen chicks from a farmer who was selling them cheap. Sarah carried the crate of peeping chicks on her lap on the ride home, laughing when they tried to escape. "They are so small," she said, peering into the crate. "They will grow fast," Jacob said. "By summer you will have fresh eggs every day." The chicken coop Jacob built was solid and predator-proof, with nesting boxes in a small yard. Sarah loved her chickens, naming each one and treating them like pets. Jacob teased her about it, but secretly he found it endearing. April came with wildflowers and warm breezes. Sarah planted her garden with Jacob's help, marking out rows for vegetables and herbs. They worked side by side, and Jacob found he enjoyed the simple pleasure of digging in the dirt with his wife beside him. The night before the party, Sarah was nervous. What if no one comes? "They will come," Jacob assured her. "People out here do not pass up a chance to socialize." He was right. Nearly 20 people showed up, including Henderson, the Chens, several other trappers and their families, and even the circuit preacher who happened to be passing through. Sarah had cooked for days, preparing enough food to feed everyone. The women brought dishes to share, and soon the cabin and yard were full of people laughing and talking. The preacher offered to say a blessing over their marriage, and Jacob and Sarah stood together in front of their cabin while he spoke words about love and partnership and building a life together. When he pronounced them man and wife in the eyes of God and the community, Jacob kissed Sarah thoroughly to cheers and applause. They danced to fiddle music as the sun set, Sarah light in Jacob's arms despite his rough dancing skills. She was radiant in her green dress, her hair pinned up with flowers she had picked that morning. "Are you happy?" Jacob asked as they swayed together. "So happy," Sarah said. "This is everything I hoped for and more." "Me too," Jacob admitted. As the party wound down and people started heading home, Henderson pulled Jacob aside. "You did good, Brennan. She is a fine woman." "I know," Jacob said. "Your brother's a smart man arranging that match." Jacob shook his head. "I'm never going to hear the end of this from James." "Probably not," Henderson agreed with a laugh. After everyone left, Jacob and Sarah cleaned up together. The cabin was a mess, but neither of them minded. It had been a good day, a celebration of what they had built together. That night, as they lay in bed exhausted but happy, Sarah said, "I want to write to James, thank him for what he did." "He will be insufferable about it," Jacob warned. "I do not care," Sarah said. "He gave me a life I never thought I would have. He deserves to know how grateful I am." Jacob pulled her close. "We will write to him tomorrow." Summer arrived in full glory. Sarah's garden flourished, producing more vegetables than 2 people could eat. She started preserving everything, filling jars with pickles and jams and tomatoes. The chickens laid eggs faithfully, and Sarah sold the extras in town, using the money to buy fabric and other supplies. Jacob's trapping had been good that year, and they had money saved. He started work on an addition to the cabin, a second room that could serve as a bedroom when they had children. Sarah helped when she could, handing him tools and holding boards steady while he nailed them in place. They fell into a comfortable partnership, each supporting the other's work. Jacob no longer felt the need to escape into the mountains for weeks at a time. His trap lines were close enough that he could check them and be home by evening. Sarah made the cabin a place he wanted to return to. In August, Sarah began feeling ill in the mornings. At first, she thought it was something she ate, but when it continued for a week, they both realized what it likely meant. "I think I might be pregnant," Sarah said one morning, her face pale. Jacob felt his heart leap. "Are you sure?" Not completely, but the signs are there, Sarah said. I am late, and I have been sick every morning. Jacob crossed the room and pulled her into his arms. This is good news. Great news. You're not worried? Sarah asked. About what? About having a child? About me being pregnant out here, far from doctors? Jacob held her at arm's length, looking into her eyes. We will handle it. Mrs. Chen has helped deliver babies before. We have time to prepare. And you are strong, Sarah. You can do this. Sarah leaned into him. I am scared. So am I, Jacob admitted, but we will figure it out together. Over the next few months, Sarah's pregnancy became obvious. Her belly grew round, and she glowed with health despite the occasional sickness. Jacob became protective to the point of ridiculousness, insisting she rest and not lift anything heavy. Sarah tolerated it for a while, then put her foot down. I am pregnant, not dying, she said one afternoon when he tried to stop her from hanging laundry. I can still do my work. I'm just worried about you, Jacob said. I know, and I love you for it, Sarah said, but you have to let me live my life. I will tell you if I need help. It was the first time she had said she loved him directly. Jacob felt the words hit him square in the chest. He pulled her close, careful of her belly. I love you too, he said roughly. So much it scares me sometimes. Sarah smiled up at him. Good. We can be scared together. In late February, on a cold night with snow falling softly outside, Sarah went into labor. Jacob rode through the darkness to fetch Mrs. Chen, his heart in his throat the whole way. Mrs. Chen came immediately, bringing her daughter to help. The labor was long and difficult. Jacob paced outside the cabin for hours, chopping wood to keep his hands busy and his mind from imagining the worst. Finally, just before dawn, he heard a baby cry. Mrs. Chen opened the door, smiling. You have a son, a big, healthy boy, and your wife is fine. Jacob rushed inside. Sarah lay in their bed, exhausted but smiling, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. She looked up when he entered. Come meet your son, she said softly. Jacob approached slowly, in awe. The baby was red-faced and squalling, with a surprising amount of dark hair. He was perfect. He is beautiful, Jacob said. He looks like you, Sarah said. He has your eyes. Jacob reached out and touched the baby's tiny hand. The infant gripped his finger with surprising strength, and Jacob felt his heart expand in a way he had not known was possible. What should we name him? Sarah asked. Jacob thought for a moment. Thomas James, after your fiancé and my brother, the two men who brought us together. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. That is perfect. They called him Tommy. He was a good baby, healthy and strong, with his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes. Jacob fell completely in love with his son, spending hours just watching him sleep or holding him while Sarah rested. The cabin felt full in the best way possible. Jacob added a cradle he had carved during Sarah's pregnancy, and Sarah sewed tiny clothes and blankets. They took turns walking Tommy when he fussed at night, and they marveled at every small thing he did. Spring came again, and Sarah planted her garden with Tommy in a sling against her chest. Jacob checked his traplines and worked on the new room, which was nearly finished. They had been married for almost 2 years, and Jacob could hardly remember what his life had been like before Sarah. One evening in May, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset with Tommy sleeping between them, Sarah said, I have been thinking. About what? Jacob asked. About how different my life is now compared to 2 years ago, Sarah said. I was alone and hopeless in St. Louis. I thought my life was over, and now I am here with you and Tommy, and I have never been happier. I know what you mean, Jacob said. I thought I wanted to be alone. I was wrong. James was right, Sarah said with a smile. We were perfect for each other. We just needed a push to find each other. Jacob reached over and took her hand. Best thing he ever did. We should invite him to visit, Sarah said. I would like to meet him properly and show him his nephew. I will write to him, Jacob promised. James arrived in July, riding in with a pack mule loaded with gifts. He was shorter than Jacob, but just as broad, with the same dark hair and a quick smile. Well, well, he said, dismounting and looking around. You have done well for yourself, brother. No thanks to you and your meddling, Jacob said, but he was grinning. James laughed and pulled him into a hug. You can thank me later, Sarah came out of the cabin with Tommy in her arms, and James's face softened. "Sarah Brennan, you are even prettier than I remembered." "James," Sarah said warmly, "thank you for everything you did. I cannot express how grateful I am." "You already have," James said, gesturing to the cabin, the garden, Jacob's obvious happiness. "This is all the thanks I need." James stayed for a week, and it was good to have him there. He entertained them with stories from his travels, played with Tommy, and helped Jacob finish the new room. On his last night, they sat around the fire, and James raised his glass. "To family," he said, "both the one we are born with and the one we make." "To family," Jacob and Sarah echoed. After James left, life settled back into its rhythm. Tommy grew quickly, becoming more alert and active. By the time winter came again, he was crawling and getting into everything. Sarah was pregnant again, due in the spring, and Jacob had expanded the chicken coop and was talking about getting a cow. The second baby arrived in April, a daughter this time. She was smaller than Tommy had been, with auburn hair and her mother's features. They named her Ruth, after Sarah's mother. "Now we have one of each," Sarah said, holding Ruth while Tommy toddled around the cabin. "Think we should stop here?" Jacob asked. Sarah laughed. "Ask me again in a year." They did not stop at 2. Over the next 5 years, 2 more children joined the family, another boy they named Daniel and a girl they named Emily. The cabin grew with additions and improvements. Jacob built a larger barn for the cow and the growing flock of chickens. Sarah's garden expanded every year, and she became known in the area for her preserved goods and her baked items. Jacob's trapping business grew as well. He took on a partner, a young man named Stevens, who wanted to learn the trade, which allowed him to spend more time at home with his family. He no longer felt the pull of solitude that had defined his earlier years. His home was full of noise and laughter and love, and that was exactly what he wanted. On their 10th anniversary, Jacob and Sarah sat on the porch after putting the children to bed. The cabin was quiet for once, and the stars were bright overhead. 10 years, Sarah said, leaning against Jacob's shoulder. "Can you believe it?" "Some days, no," Jacob admitted. "It feels like yesterday that I came home to find you in my kitchen." "Cooking dinner," Sarah reminded him with a smile. "You looked so shocked." "I was shocked," Jacob said. "I had no idea what to do with you." "You figured it out," Sarah said. Jacob wrapped his arm around her. "We figured it out, together." "Do you ever regret it?" Sarah asked. "Your quiet life in the mountains?" "Not for a second," Jacob said firmly. "This is better than anything I could have imagined. You and the children, this life we built. It is everything." Sarah turned to kiss him. "I love you, Jacob Brennan." "I love you too, Sarah Brennan," he replied. They sat there in the comfortable silence that came from years of partnership, watching the stars and listening to the night sounds of their land. Inside, their children slept safe and warm. The garden would need tending in the morning, the animals would need feeding, and there would be 1,000 small tasks that made up their days. But they would do it together, as they had done everything for the past 10 years. Sarah had arrived as a stranger in his kitchen, serving him a meal that had changed everything. She had offered him hope and companionship and love when he had not even known he needed it. And in return, Jacob had given her a home, a family, and a partnership built on trust and respect. As they finally went inside to their own bed, Jacob looked around at the life they had created. 4 sleeping children, a sturdy home, food in the cellar, and a future full of possibility. It was more than he had ever dreamed of back when he lived alone in these mountains. The strange woman in his kitchen had become his wife, his partner, his love. And the meal she had served him that first night had indeed changed everything, opening his heart to a life he had not known he wanted, but could no longer imagine living without. The years continued to pass in the Montana Territory, each one bringing new challenges and new joys to the Brennan family. By the time their 15th anniversary arrived, Tommy was 13 and already showing signs of becoming as tall and broad as his father. Ruth was 11, a serious girl who loved to read every book they could get their hands on. Daniel was 9 and wild as a March hare, always climbing trees and exploring the woods. Emily, at 7, was the family peacemaker, able to calm any argument with her sweet nature. Jacob had built their home into a prosperous operation. The trapline still brought in good money, but he had also started raising cattle, just a small herd at first, but growing every year. Sarah's chickens numbered in the dozens now, and she sold eggs, preserved goods, and her famous bread to families throughout the region. The cabin had grown into a proper house with 4 bedrooms, a large kitchen, and even a small parlor where Sarah kept her sewing and the children did their lessons. Jacob had built most of it himself with help from neighbors and his sons as they grew old enough. Every board and nail represented their life together, their commitment to building something lasting. One autumn afternoon, a stranger rode up to their house. He was well dressed in city clothes, riding a fine horse, and he carried himself with the bearing of someone important. Jacob was in the yard working on a fence when the man approached. "Are you Jacob Brennan?" the man asked. "I am," Jacob replied, wiping his hands on his pants. "What can I do for you?" "My name is William Hartford. I represent a company in Chicago that is interested in purchasing trapping rights in this territory. I have heard you have some of the best trap lines in the region." Jacob leaned against the fence post, studying the man. "Not interested in selling." "I have not told you the price yet," Hartford said with a smooth smile. "Does not matter," Jacob said. "These trap lines are not just business. They are my livelihood and my legacy for my sons. They are not for sale." Hartford's smile faded slightly. "Mr. Brennan, the company I represent is prepared to make a very generous offer." "Still not interested," Jacob said firmly. Sarah had come out onto the porch, attracted by the sound of voices. She stood watching, and Jacob caught her eye. She nodded slightly, supporting his decision. Hartford tried for another 10 minutes to change Jacob's mind, but finally gave up and rode away. Jacob walked back to the porch where Sarah was waiting. "You did the right thing," she said. "I know," Jacob replied. "This land, this life, it is ours. I am not giving that up for money." Sarah smiled and kissed his cheek. "That is why I love you." That winter was harsh, with temperatures dropping so low that water froze solid in the bucket overnight. Jacob worried about the cattle and spent long hours making sure they had shelter and feed. Tommy helped him, the boy becoming a young man right before his eyes. "Dad," Tommy said one evening as they fed the cattle together, "do you think I will be a trapper like you?" Jacob considered the question. "Do you want to be?" "I think so," Tommy said. "I like being out in the mountains, but I also like the cattle. Maybe I could do both." "That's what I do," Jacob pointed out. "There is no rule that says you have to choose just one thing. You find what works for you and build on it." "Did you always know you wanted to live like this?" Tommy asked. Jacob smiled. "No, when I was your age, I had no idea what I wanted. I just knew I did not want to be stuck in a city. The rest I figured out as I went along." "Do you ever wish you had done something different?" Tommy asked. "Not anymore," Jacob said honestly. "There was a time before your mother came when I thought maybe I should have chosen an easier life. But now, I would not change anything." Spring brought new lambs and calves, and the garden came to life under Sarah's care. The children helped with the planting, even little Emily carefully placing seeds in the rows her mother marked out. Jacob stood at the edge of the garden one morning, watching his family work together. Sarah was showing Ruth how to properly space the bean plants. Daniel was hauling water from the creek with Tommy. Emily was singing to herself as she planted radish seeds. This was what mattered, not money or recognition or an easier life. This family, this land, this partnership he had with Sarah. It was everything. That summer, James visited again, bringing his new wife Elizabeth with him. She was a petite blonde woman with a quick wit and a warm laugh. James had finally settled down, opening a store in Denver and making quite a success of it. "You were right to meddle," Jacob told his brother one evening as they sat on the porch. "Best thing you ever did for me." James grinned. "I told you so." I know, Jacob said. "You will never let me forget it." "Absolutely not," James agreed cheerfully. The two couples spent the week enjoying each other's company. Elizabeth and Sarah became fast friends, trading recipes and sewing patterns. The children were fascinated by their aunt and uncle from the city, asking endless questions about life in Denver. When James and Elizabeth left, James pulled Jacob into a tight hug. "You have built something real here, brother. I am proud of you." "Thank you," Jacob said, surprised by the emotion in his throat. "For everything." More years passed. Tommy turned 16 and started courting a girl from a neighboring ranch. Ruth discovered a love of teaching and began helping the younger children in the area with their studies. Daniel apprenticed with the blacksmith in town, showing a natural talent for metalwork. Emily continued to be the heart of the family, keeping everyone connected and happy. Jacob was 47 now, his hair showing gray at the temples, his face weathered by sun and wind. Sarah was 41, still beautiful to him, her auburn hair now streaked with silver. They had grown older together, their love deepening with each year. One night, lying in bed after a long day, Sarah said, "I've been thinking about that first meal I made you." "The venison stew?" Jacob asked. "Yes," Sarah said. "Do you remember what you thought when you saw me in your kitchen?" "I thought I was hallucinating," Jacob admitted with a laugh. 6 weeks in the mountains eating nothing but jerky will do that to a man. Sarah playfully swatted his arm. "Be serious." Jacob rolled onto his side to face her. "I thought you were either very brave or very crazy. I could not figure out which." "Maybe both," Sarah said. "Definitely both," Jacob agreed. "But I am grateful for it. You changed my entire life with that one meal." "It was not the meal," Sarah said softly. "It was everything after. The choice we made to give each other a chance." "You are right," Jacob said. "We both could have walked away. I could have sent you back to St. Louis. You could have decided this life was too hard." "But we did not," Sarah said. "We stayed. We tried. We built this life together." Jacob pulled her close. "Best decision I ever made." By their 20th anniversary, the house was bursting with life. Tommy had married his sweetheart Anna, and they had built a cabin on the edge of Jacob's land. 2 babies of their own now, making Jacob and Sarah grandparents. Ruth was engaged to a teacher from the nearby town and planning a spring wedding. Daniel was still apprenticing but talking about starting his own blacksmith shop. Emily, at 17, was the only one still at home, and she showed no signs of rushing into marriage. "I want to see the world first," Emily told her parents over dinner one night. "Maybe travel to San Francisco or even back east." Sarah looked worried, but Jacob said, "Then you should do it. Life is short, see what's out there." "But be safe," Sarah added quickly, "and come home." "Always," Emily promised. Jacob and Sarah had built more than a home over their 20 years together. They had built a legacy. Their children were strong and capable, ready to make their own way in the world. The land they had cultivated would continue to provide for generations. The love they shared had created ripples that extended far beyond their own lives. On their actual anniversary night, Jacob surprised Sarah with a special dinner. He had hunted a turkey and prepared it himself, along with all her favorite dishes. He had even baked bread, though it was not nearly as good as hers. "You cooked for me," Sarah said, tears in her eyes as she looked at the spread on the table. "You cooked for me first," Jacob reminded her, 20 years ago. Seemed fitting to return the favor. They ate by candlelight, remembering that first awkward dinner when they had been strangers legally bound to each other. So much had changed since then, but the fundamentals remained the same. They were partners, working together to build a life. After dinner, Jacob presented Sarah with a gift. It was a locket on a gold chain, delicate and beautiful. Inside were tiny photographs of all 4 children. "Jacob, this is too much," Sarah breathed. "Nothing is too much for you," Jacob said. He fastened it around her neck. "You gave up everything to come here. You trusted me when you had no reason to. You built this life with me. This is just a small token of everything you mean to me." Sarah kissed him, and in that kiss was 20 years of partnership, of love, of building a life together against all odds. The years continued their steady march. Ruth married her teacher and moved to town, starting a school of her own. Daniel opened his blacksmith shop and quickly became known for quality work. Emily did travel, spending 2 years exploring before finally settling in Helena, where she opened a restaurant. Tommy took over more of the ranch work as Jacob slowed down. At 60, Jacob was still strong, but he felt the years in his joints on cold mornings. Sarah's hands had grown stiff with arthritis, making sewing difficult, though she still managed to keep the house running smoothly. They had 8 grandchildren now, with more on the way. The house was often full of visiting children and grandchildren, noise and laughter filling the rooms. Jacob and Sarah loved it, though they also appreciated the quiet evenings when it was just the 2 of them. One such evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Sarah said, "Do you remember what you said to me that first night, about giving it the winter?" "I remember," Jacob said. "I thought I was being so reasonable, giving us both an out." "But by Christmas you knew," Sarah said. By Christmas, I was already in love with you, Jacob admitted. I just was not ready to admit it yet. When did you know? Sarah asked. For certain? Jacob thought back over the years. That night you told me you did not want to wait until spring. When you said you were happy with me. That is when I let myself really feel it. I knew before that, Sarah said. I think I knew the first time you smiled at me. Really smiled, not just being polite. When was that? Jacob asked, trying to remember. When I beat you at cards, Sarah said with a laugh. You were so surprised, and then you just laughed. I thought, this is a man I could love. They sat in comfortable silence, hands intertwined, watching the Montana sky turn gold and pink and purple. They had built a good life, full of love and family and purpose. As the stars began to appear, Jacob said, Thank you. For what? Sarah asked. For taking a chance on a strange arrangement, for staying even when it would have been easier to leave, for building this life with me. Sarah squeezed his hand. Thank you for giving me a home, for seeing me as a partner, not just a housekeeper, for loving me. They went inside as the night grew cold, walking slowly, supporting each other. The house welcomed them, warm and full of the memories they had created together. Jacob lived to be 73, Sarah to 70. They spent their last years surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. The ranch continued to prosper under Tommy's management, and the family they had created spread across the territory. On a warm spring morning, Jacob woke to find Sarah still sleeping beside him. He watched her in the early light, this woman who had walked into his cabin 25 years ago and changed everything. Her hair was white now, her face lined with years, but she was still beautiful to him. She opened her eyes and smiled. Good morning. Good morning, Jacob said. I love you. I love you too, Sarah replied, as she had every morning for a quarter century. They rose slowly, helping each other as they always did now, and made their way to the kitchen. Jacob started the coffee while Sarah began preparing breakfast, moving around each other in the dance they had perfected over years of partnership. Through the window, they could see their land spreading out before them. The garden Sarah had planted and tended for decades, the barn Jacob had built and rebuilt, the pastures where cattle grazed, and beyond, the mountains that had been Jacob's first love before Sarah had shown him what real love could be. Tommy arrived with his family for Sunday dinner, as he did every week. Ruth and her husband came from town. Daniel brought his wife and children. Emily made the trip from Helena. The house filled with voices and laughter, 3 generations gathering around the table. Jacob looked around at his family, all of them here because a strange woman had once walked into his kitchen and refused to leave, because he had been willing to give her a chance, because they had chosen each other, day after day, year after year. Sarah caught his eye across the crowded table and smiled, that same smile that had captured his heart all those years ago. He smiled back, his heart full. This was what it was all about, not the land or the money or the success. This family, this love, this legacy of choosing each other every single day. Sarah had served him venison stew that first night, but what she had really offered was hope, partnership, and love, and he had accepted, building a life richer than he had ever imagined possible. As the sun set on another day, Jacob and Sarah sat together on their porch, watching their grandchildren play in the yard. They held hands as they had for 25 years, 2 people who had started as strangers and become partners, lovers, best friends. The strange woman in his kitchen had indeed changed everything, and Jacob Brennan thanked God every day that she had. Years later, long after both Jacob and Sarah had passed peacefully in their sleep within months of each other, their grandchildren would tell stories about them, about the mountain man who came home to find a stranger in his kitchen, about the brave woman who traveled across the country to marry a man she had never met, about how they built a life together from nothing but determination and love. The ranch still stood, now run by Tommy's son. The recipes Sarah had perfected were still used by her daughters and granddaughters. The values Jacob and Sarah had instilled of hard work and partnership and choosing love every day continued through the generations. And in the cemetery on the hill overlooking the ranch, 2 headstones stood side by side. Jacob Brennan, 1846-1919, beloved husband, father, grandfather Sarah Brennan, 1854–1919. Beloved wife, mother, grandmother. Together forever. Their story had begun with a simple meal in an isolated cabin, cooked by a stranger who refused to be anything less than family. It had grown into something beautiful and lasting, a testament to the power of taking chances, of being brave enough to hope, and of choosing love even when it seemed impossible. The strange woman in the kitchen had served him venison stew that first night, but what she had really served was a future he had not known he wanted, a love he had not known he needed, and a family that would carry their legacy forward for generations to come. And that changed everything.